My best friend Sarah and I had finally saved enough to embark on our much-anticipated adventure to Thailand. That night, we were enjoying the vibrant nightlife of Bangkok. Sarah and I were sipping cocktails at a trendy bar in the heart of the city, soaking in the atmosphere. A stunning girl with a figure that turned heads approached us with an infectious smile and introduced herself. "Hi, I'm Ava." "Hello, Ava," I responded. "Are you local?" "Yes, I am." Ava nodded. "I work part-time as a tour guide, showing tourists hidden gems of the city." "That sounds interesting," Sarah said with enthusiasm. "Can you tell us about some secret spots in Bangkok?" "Of course." Ava smiled. "I know a few places that you would definitely love." She talked about the secret spots in Bangkok with such enthusiasm that Sarah and I were instantly drawn in. Over the next few days, Ava showed us around, each site more breathtaking than the last. She knew the best street food stalls, the quietest corners of chaotic markets, and mesmerising spots that weren't on any tourist map. The more time we spent with her, the more we trusted her. Ava was not just a guide, she became our friend. One evening, Ava suggested a visit to a luxurious massage parlour. "It's not known to many tourists," she said with a wink, "but I take all my friends there." Trusting her completely, Sarah and I agreed without hesitation. The massage parlour was tucked away in a quieter part of the city. Inside, the atmosphere was calming, with soft music and dim lighting. We were led into a beautifully decorated room with 2 massage tables. The masseuses greeted us warmly, and soon we were both drifting into relaxation under the skilled hands of our therapists. However, as the massage progressed, I began to feel unusually drowsy. I tried to shake off the sleepiness, attributing it to jet lag and the relaxing environment. Glancing over at Sarah, I noticed she seemed equally lethargic, her movements sluggish. "Sarah, are you feeling okay?" I whispered, my voice slurring slightly. She looked at me with half-closed eyes, struggling to keep them open. "I don't know. I feel so tired," she mumbled. When I woke up, I found myself in Sarah in a stark, dimly lit room. The walls were made of rough, cold concrete, and the floor was covered in grime. The air was thick with the smell of damp and mould, and our wrists were bound tightly with rough rope. My clothes felt dishevelled, as if they had been disturbed, adding to my growing sense of unease. "Sarah, wake up!" I hissed, shaking her gently. "We need to get out of here." Sarah groaned and slowly opened her eyes, confusion and fear spreading across her face. "Where are we? What happened?" "I don't know, but we need to move fast," I replied, my voice trembling. We knew we had to act fast before they moved us to a location from which escape would be impossible. "Sarah, look at these ropes," I whispered, examining the bindings on my wrists. "They're not as tight as they seem. We might be able to get out of them." Sarah nodded, determination replacing fear in her eyes. "Let's do it." Using the sharp edge of a broken tile we found on the floor, we managed to fray the ropes enough to slip our hands free. Our hearts pounded as we worked, terrified that someone would come in and catch us at any moment. Once our hands were free, we quietly made our way to the door. It was locked, but we could hear voices outside. We waited until the voices faded, then used a piece of metal we found to pick the lock. It was a skill I had learned from my brother, who always joked it might come in handy someday. I never thought he'd be right. The door finally creaked open, and we slipped out into the dimly lit hallway. We moved as silently as possible, our senses on high alert. "Do you think we're going the right way?" Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. "I don't know, but we have to keep moving," I replied, glancing around nervously. Finally, we found a window that led to a small alleyway. It was a tight squeeze, only big enough for one person to pass through at a time, and it would take some effort to get through. "Sarah, you go first," I urged, trying to hide the panic in my voice. Sarah nodded and began to climb through the window, but as she struggled to fit through the small opening, a wave of fear and self-preservation washed over me. If she went first, I might not have enough time to escape. The realization hit me hard, and a selfish, desperate instinct took over. "Sarah, hurry!" I urged, my voice trembling with urgency. Just as Sarah was halfway through the window, we heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching rapidly from the corridor. Panic surged through me. If they caught us now, we'd have no chance. "Sarah, faster!" I hissed, trying to push her through. But the footsteps were getting closer, and I knew we were running out of time. In a split-second decision, driven by sheer survival instinct, I grabbed her legs and yanked her back into the room, the force of my pull causing her to fall heavily to the ground. She looked up at me in shock and betrayal, but I couldn't afford to hesitate. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice breaking, as I scrambled through the window myself. I managed to slip through and hit the ground outside just as the door behind us burst open. Ava and 2 men stormed in, their faces twisted with rage. "Run!" I screamed, knowing it was too late for Sarah, but hoping to save myself. I ran as fast as I could, not daring to look back. My heart pounded in my chest, and my breath came in ragged gasps. The alleyway seemed endless, but I forced myself to keep going. I didn't stop until I reached a busy street, where I flagged down a taxi and begged the driver to take me to the nearest police station. I told the police everything, and they promised to launch an investigation. However, days turned into weeks, with no significant progress. Determined to find Sarah, I stayed in Thailand for 2 weeks, tirelessly gathering information. I joined forces with Sarah's family, who had flown in immediately after hearing the news. Together we combed through the neighbourhoods, spoke with locals, and approached shady establishments, hoping to uncover any clues. During this time, I grew close to Sarah's family. Her mother, a strong yet heartbroken woman, often shared stories of Sarah's childhood, trying to keep her spirit alive amidst the despair. I felt their anguish deeply, but couldn't confess that in my desperate bid to survive, I had left Sarah behind the night she was taken. Despite our relentless efforts, the trail remained cold. The traffickers seemed to have vanished without a trace, leaving us feeling increasingly helpless. Eventually, reality caught up with me. My job back home was at risk, and my family needed me. With a heavy heart, I realized I couldn't continue my search indefinitely. Reluctantly, I booked a flight back to my country, promising myself that this was not the end of my quest for justice. Sarah's family decided to stay in Thailand, driven by hope. As I boarded the plane, I felt a deep sense of sorrow, as if I was abandoning Sarah all over again. Back home, I resumed my life, but the memories of Thailand and Sarah's unresolved fate haunted me. I stayed in touch with Sarah's family and the organisations we had worked with, hoping for any breakthrough in the case. This trip to Thailand had been Mark's idea, a spontaneous holiday he had insisted upon, saying it would be a perfect way to escape the routine and spend quality time together. When my parents coincidentally had a break in their busy schedules, they agreed to join us, seeing it as an opportunity to relax and perhaps get to know Mark better. Coming from a wealthy family, my relationship with Mark, a dedicated but modestly earning drain specialist, had always been under the scrutinising gaze of my parents. Although they were always polite to him, their lack of warmth was evident. They couldn't hide their disdain for his humble background. On our 3rd evening, Mark suggested we dine at a local restaurant we had discovered. It was a quaint place tucked away in an older part of Bangkok, exuding an authentic charm. The food was exceptional. My father, usually a man of few words, couldn't help but comment on the exquisite flavours. "This Tom Yum goong is incredible," he said, his tone carrying a hint of genuine admiration. As the evening progressed, the atmosphere at the table grew increasingly warm and convivial. Laughter punctured our conversation, and the initial stiffness that had characterized our interactions had begun to melt away. However, the following morning, our world was turned upside down. My parents were missing from their room, which showed no signs of forced entry or struggle. Only their luggage remained. Mark and I spent the next few days searching tirelessly for any clues about my parents' whereabouts. We visited nearby hospitals, checked with other hotels, and even combed through local markets and tourist spots, hoping that someone might have seen them. The police were also notified, but there was no progress. We checked the surveillance footage, but it didn't provide any clues. After weeks with no progress, we returned home, the mystery of my parents' disappearance casting a shadow over our lives. Yet during these trying times, Mark and I found solace in each other. Mark proposed to me one quiet evening at home. We began planning our wedding, dreaming of a small, intimate ceremony. 1 month after our return, I discovered I was pregnant. The news filled us with a mix of joy and anxiety, given the circumstances. Yet planning for our child's arrival brought us even closer. We spent evenings discussing names, decorating the nursery, and imagining our future as a family. These moments of shared happiness and anticipation provided a much-needed respite from the ongoing investigation. But the peace was short-lived. 2 months later, a breakthrough in the investigation prompted my return to Thailand. Alone this time, as Mark, on the night before his flight to Thailand, suddenly claimed that his father had collapsed due to high blood pressure and needed immediate medical attention. He insisted on staying behind to handle the emergency, promising to join me in Thailand as soon as he could. Upon arrival, I was summoned to the police station, where a stern-looking officer introduced himself as Officer Somchai. He led me into a small, dimly lit room and gestured for me to sit down. His expression was grave, and I could sense that what he was about to tell me would change everything. "Miss Emily," he began, his voice steady and serious, "we have made significant progress in the investigation into your parents' disappearance. I need you to listen carefully to what I'm about to say." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "Your fiancé, Mark, is not who you think he is. We have gathered evidence that implicates him in a heinous crime. The restaurant where you had your last meal with your parents is owned by a close associate of Mark's. We have obtained security footage showing Mark and his associate handling large, suspicious bags late at night." I shook my head in disbelief. "No, that can't be true. Mark would never—" Officer Somchai raised a hand to stop me. "I understand this is difficult to hear, but the evidence is overwhelming. We found traces of blood and DNA in a hidden basement below the restaurant. This basement was used to commit the murders. Your parents were drugged, taken there, and brutally killed." He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in before continuing. "The security footage we recovered was heavily damaged, but our forensic team used advanced technology to restore it. The footage clearly shows Mark and his associate moving your parents' unconscious bodies into the basement." Tears streamed down my face as I struggled to comprehend his words. "No, there must be some mistake. Mark loves me. He would never hurt my parents." Officer Somchai's expression softened slightly. "I know this is hard to accept, but we have witnesses who saw Mark and his friend acting suspiciously. The tools used for dismemberment were found, and they matched the DNA evidence." He took a deep breath before delivering the most horrifying detail. "The remains were processed and stored in the restaurant's refrigeration units. Mark and his friend gradually disposed of the remains by mixing small portions into the meat supplies used for regular dishes served to unsuspecting patrons. This gruesome detail was corroborated by several employees who noticed unusual activities and odd smells, but were too afraid to question their employers. Despite the overwhelming evidence presented by Officer Somchai, a part of me refused to believe it. The Mark I knew was kind, loving, and dedicated. The details seemed too monstrous to align with the person I had shared my life with. Officer Somchai continued, his tone growing even more serious. Miss Emily, there's one more thing you need to know. Mark's associate has confessed and provided us with Mark's motive. According to the associate, Mark felt deeply resentful towards your parents. They looked down on him because of his humble background and demanded a substantial dowry of 200,000 yuan as a condition for approving your marriage. Mark saw this as an insurmountable obstacle and a profound insult. It fueled his anger and ultimately led him to plot this heinous act. He hesitated before adding another chilling detail. After the murders, Mark and his associate went a step further. They cooked the meat from your parents' bodies and served it as breakfast the next morning. The staff and patrons, including yourself, unknowingly consumed it. This barbaric act was meant to ensure that the evidence would be disposed of quickly and to further humiliate your parents even in death. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions. I was determined to confront Mark and hear his side of the story. I couldn't believe what the police were saying about him being involved in such a heinous crime, and I needed to know the truth from his own lips. Now, as I sat on the plane back home, I clutched my growing belly, feeling the gentle movements of our unborn child. My heart was heavy with doubt and fear, but also with a desperate hope that there was some explanation, some misunderstanding that could clear his name. The plane began its descent, and I steeled myself for the confrontation that awaited. The truth, whatever it may be, was just hours away.